for those of you that are joining in, and perhaps this is the first time that you're joining in on this platform, I'm Dr. Victor Counted. I'm a psychologist. I'm also a professor of psychology in a Christian university. And this series is about the most important relationship that anyone will ever have, especially you. You know, over the past, it's going to 2 decades now, and I've spent years studying what psychologists call attachment theory. This particular theory, in essence, simply began with a man that was named British psychiatrist named John Bowlby, who noticed that children don't bond with just anyone. They actually bond with the people who are consistently there in their life. And those bonds become something Bowlby called an internal working model. Internal working model are sort of a template or a map of how relationships work. And here's what research in psychology of religion actually show, and what I explore in depth in my book, Bonding with God. The fact that template, our internal working model, doesn't just stay in childhood. It actually travels with you into your marriage, into your relationship, into your friendships, even into your prayer life. In other words, what I mean by that is that the way that you were loved or the way that you were not loved shapes ultimately what you expect from God. Let me give you some examples. For example, if your early caregivers were warm and consistent, if love came reliably, and you will probably find it relatively natural to trust someone else, particularly to trust God. You will find it natural to bring your heart feelings or the difficult things that you're going through to God, because you did that with the very first caregivers in your life. You might find it natural to believe that God will show up for you. But if love was conditional or absent, or you experience attachment betrayal growing up, or with the early caregivers in your life, or you experience love to become unpredictable, you may at the same time carry the same perception, the same expectation, bracing into your fate. You approach God with your guard up. You wonder if He is really there. You perform for Him because you've sort of earned that love. You've learned that love has to be earned, and that's what a lot of Christians, a lot of people of faith today, do. Sometimes they perform their faith. Faith becomes performative. And I think that this is not necessarily a character flaw. I think it's just psychology. And more than that, it is the beginning of understanding something that can actually change. And in my book, Bonding with God, I introduce 2 pathways. One is what I call the correspondence pathway, and the second is the compensation pathway. Now, the correspondence pathway simply means that your God bond, or your bonding with God, sort of mirrors your early caregiving experiences. In other words, that the God that you believe in resembles the parents that you had. On the other hand, the compensation pathway means that God fills the gap. Faith becomes your answer to what was maybe genuinely missing in your life. Maybe you're growing up not having caregivers, not having parents look after you. You gave your life to God because now you have a reliable attachment figure who can always be there. In other words, your relationship with God provides what human relationship could not provide for you. Now, neither of these particular pathways are wrong. It's wrong. Both are sacred routes to the same God. For example, Timothy, the Bible tells us that Timothy had the kind of faith of its grandmother Eunice. The grandmother modeled that faith, and so he also, models the same kind of faith, in the way he relates to God, which is why he was very much of a trustworthy person. He trusted Paul to help him navigate the complexities of his faith. And also, you could tell the same with Hagar as well, who eventually, God showed up for her as El Roi, the God that sees her. And essentially, you could think about how that has implication, because for Hagar, for the first time, now God really sees her. And for most of us, we turn to faith because for the first time in our life, we are meeting or encountering a divine figure, an attachment figure that truly sees us. But you need to know which one is yours, because I think that knowledge is the beginning of freedom. You need to understand how you relate to God, your developmental pathway in your relationship with God. And here is the most important thing that I want you to hear today. The fact that your history is not your calling. The internal working models that we carry, that you carry, however it was formed, it's not permanent. In fact, the research, it's clear in itself, and the theology, it even makes it even more clearer. The fact that the God bond, our bonding with God, our relationship with God can grow, it can shift. And essentially, a person who has spent their whole life approaching God with anxiety or distance can learn through real encounters with a faithful God, and this is really what security ultimately feels like, and this is what the series is about. So here it's the first step for this week. I want you hopefully to take a blanket page, draw a circle, and write God in the center of that circle, and around the circle, write every word that honestly describes how you feel, how God feels to you right now. I'm not talking about what you think that He should be, but what He is in your actual experience right now. Is He warmed? Is He distant? Do you perceive Him to be saved? Do you perceive Him to be demanding? Do you perceive Him to be present? Do you perceive Him to be absent? Whatever it is, in psychology of religion, we call this the God images. And essentially, when you do that, I want you to then circle the words you wish you were much stronger. Those are circled words. That's the work that we're going to do together throughout the series. And I'm hoping that you can join me as we start this journey of bonding with God, so that we can really experience spiritual transformation, which really is at the very center of flourishing. I'm Victor Counted. I hope that you can pick up a copy of Bonding with God by Baker Academic, and I will see you next week. We'll talk soon. Bye.